Chapter 16 of Cradock Nowell, A Tale of the New Forest, Volume 2, by Richard Doddridge Blackmore. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Lynne Thompson. Chapter 16. The good people assembled in Nowelhurst Church were agreeably surprised, on the following Sunday, by the announcement from Mr. Pell, in that loud, sonorous voice of his, which had frightened spinsters out of their wits, lest he were forbidding, instead of asking, their banns of matrimony, that there would be no sermon that morning, inasmuch as he, the Reverend Octavius, was forced to hurry away at full speed, to assuage the rampant desire of Rushford for the performance of divine service. Mrs. Nowell Corklemore, who had the great curtained pew of the hall entirely to herself and child, for Eoa never would go to church, because they defy the devil there; Georgie, who appeased her active mind by counting the brass–headed nails, and then multiplying them into each other, and subtracting the ones that were broken, lifted her indescribable eyes, and said, "Thank God," almost audibly. Octavius Pell, hurrying out of the porch, ascended Coræbus, as had been arranged; but he did it so rapidly, and with such an air of decision, that Amy, standing at the churchyard gate, full of beautiful misgivings, could not help exclaiming, "Oh, please, Mr. Pell, whatever you do, leave your stick here till Monday. We will take such care of it." "Indeed, I fear I must not, Miss Rosedew," Octavius answered, gravely, looking first at his stick, and then at the flanks of Raby, who was full of interesting tricks. "I have so far to go, you know, and I must try to keep time with them. Whoa, you little villain!" "Oh dear, I am so sorry. And at any rate, please do not strike him, only stroke him with it. He is so very high–spirited, and he has never had a wheal upon him, at least since he came to papa, and I could not bear to see it, and I know you won't, Mr. Pell." Octavius looked at the soft–hearted girl, blushing so in her new–drawn bonnet, mauve with black, for the sake of poor Clayton. He looked at her out of his knowing dry eyes, in that sort of response to the litany style which a curate adopts to his rector's daughter. "Can you suppose, Miss Rosedew, that I would have the heart to beat him now? Ah, if you will you then?" Ræbus thought better of it. "No, I hope you would not," said Amy, in pure good faith, with a glance, however, at the thick bamboo, "because it would be so cruel. It is hollow, I hope, but it has such knots, and it looks so very hard." "Hollow, and thin as a piece of pie–crust. And you know how this wood splits." "Oh, I am so glad, because you can't hurt him so very much. Please not to go, if you can hold him, more than 3 miles and a half an hour. Papa says that is the pace that always suits his health best. And please to take the saddle off, and keep it at your house, that the Rushford boy may not ride him back. And please to choose a steady boy from the head class in your Sunday–school, and, if possible, a communicant. But I'm sadly afraid there's no trusting the boys." "Indeed, I fear not," said Octavius, gravely; and adding to himself, "at any rate, when you are concerned, you darling. What a love you are! But there's no chance for me, I know. And it's a good job for me that I knew it. Oh, you little angel, I wonder who the lucky fellow is." Aunt Eudoxia had dropped him a hint, quite in a casual way, when she saw that the stout young bachelor was going on over head and ears. Sweet Amy watched Mr. Pell, or rather his steed, with fond interest, until they turned the corner. And certainly the pace, so far, was very sedate indeed. Octavius was an upright man, you could see that by his seat in the saddle, as well as a kind and good–natured one, and on no account would he have vexed that gentle and beautiful girl. Nevertheless, he grew impatient, as Coræbus pricked his ears pretentiously, and snorted so as to defy the winds, and was fain to travel sidewise, as if the distance was not enough for him. And all the time he was swallowing the earth at the rate of no more than 4 miles an hour. Then the young parson pulled out his watch, and saw that it wanted but half an hour to the time himself had fixed for the morning service at Rushford, and he could not bear the thought of keeping the poor folk waiting about the cross, as they always did, and would wait till the parson appeared among them. As Mr. Wise has well observed, the peasant of the New Forest is too full of veneration. And here let me acknowledge, as behoveth a man to do, not in a scrambling preface, which nobody ever would read, but in the body of my work, great and loving obligation to the labours of Mr. John R. Wise. His book is perfectly beautiful, written in admirable English, full of observation, taste, and gentle learning, and the descriptions of scenery are such that they make the heart yearn to verify them. I know the New Forest pretty well, from my own perambulations and periquitations. One barbarism is no worse than the other, but I never should have loved it as I do, but for his loving guidance. The Reverend Mr. Pell, as some people put when they write to a parson, hoping still to keep faith with Amy, because her eyes were so lovely, pulled the snaffle, and turned Coræbus into a short cut, through beeches and hazels. Then compromise came soon to an end, and the big bamboo was compelled to fall upon the fat flank of Coræbus, because he would not go without it. He showed sense of that first attention only by a little buck–jump, and a sprightly wag of his tail. Then, hoping that the situation need not be looked in the face, shambled along at 5 miles an hour, with a mild responsibility. "5 miles more," said Octave Pell, "and only 20 minutes to do it in. It's an unlucky thing for you, Coræbus, that your mistress is engaged." Whack came the yellow bamboo again, and this time in solid earnest. Ræbus went off as if he meant to go mad. He had never known such a blow since the age wherein he belonged to the innkeeper. Oh, could a horse with 4 feeds a day be expected to put up with tyranny? But, to the naggy's great amazement, Octave Pell did not tumble off. More than that, he seemed to stick closer, with a most unpleasant embrace, and a pressure that told upon the wind, not of heaven, but of horse, till the following symptoms appeared. First a wheeze, and creak internal, a slow creak, like leather chafing, or a pair of bellows out of order; then a louder remonstrance, like the ironwork of a roller, or the gudgeons of a wheelbarrow; then, faster and faster, a sucking noise, like the bucket of an old pump, when the gardener works by the job; finally, puff, and roar, and shriek, with notes of passing sadness, like the neap–tide wailing up a cavern, or a lament of the Berkshire blowing stone. In forest glades, where hollow hoofs fell on the sod quite mutely, that roar was enough to try masculine courage, though never unnerved by a heart–shock. How then could poor Pearl Garnet, sitting all alone in a lonely spot, wherein she had pledged herself to her dead love, sitting there to indulge her tears, the only luxury left her, how could she help being frightened to death as the unearthly sound approached her? The terror was mutual. Coræbus, turning the corner sharply, stopped short, in a mode that must have sent his true master over his withers, to explore the nature of the evil. Then he shook all through, and would have bolted, if the bamboo had not fallen heavily. In the niche of a hollow oak was crouching, falling backward with terror, and clutching at the brave old bark, yet trying to hide behind it, only the snowy arms would come outwards, a beautiful girl, clad in summer white on that foggy day of December. The brown cloak, which had protected her from sylvan curiosity, lay on the ground a few yards away, on the spot so sad and sacred. Pearl Garnet's grief, if we knew the whole of it, or perhaps because we cannot, was greater than any girl could bear. A lovely, young, and loving maid, with stores of imagination, yet a practical power of stowing it, of building castles, yet keeping them all within compass of the kitchen–range, quite different from our Amy, yet a better wife for some men, according to what the trumps are, and Amy must have hearts or she dies. That very nice girl, we have let her go weep, and never once cared to follow her. There is never any justice in this world. Therefore, who cares to apologize? It would take up all our business time, if we did it properly. Now, as she stretched her white arms forth, and her delicate form shrunk back into the black embrace of the oak–tree, while her rich hair was streaming all down her breast, and her dark eyes still full of tear–drops, the rider no less than the horse was amazed, and seemed to behold a vision. Then, as she shrunk away into the tree–bole, with a shriek of deadly terror, for what love casteth out fear, and she saw not through the ivy's green, and Coræbus groaned sepulchrally, Pell came down with a dash on one foot, and went, quick jump, to help her. In a fainting fit, for the heart so firm and defiant in days of happiness was fluxed now and frail with misery. She was cowering away in the dark tree–nook, like the pearls of mistletoe fallen, with her head thrown back, such an elegant head, a woman's greatest beauty, and the round arms hanging helpless. Hereupon Mr. Pell was abroad. He had never experienced any sisters, nor much mother consciously, being the 8th son, as of course we know, of a jolly Yorkshire baronet. At any rate, he had lost his mother at the birth of Nonus Pell, and I am sorry there are not 90 of them, if of equal merit. So Octavius stood like a fish out of water, with both hands in his pocket, as it is so generally the habit of fishes to stand. Then, meaning no especial harm, nor perhaps great good for that matter, he said to himself, "Confound it all, what the deuce am I to do?" His sermon upon the third commandment, about to be preached at Rushford, where the fishermen swore like St. Peter, that sermon went cracked in his pocket at such a shocking ejaculation. Never heeding that, he went on to do what a stout fellow and a gentleman must have done in this emergency. He lifted the drooping figure forth into the open air, touching it only with his hands, timidly and reverently, as if every fair curve were sacred. Then he fetched water in his best Sunday hat, the only chimney–pot he possessed, from the stream trickling through the spire–bed, and he sprinkled it on the broad white forehead, as if he were christening a baby. The moment he saw that her life was returning, and her deep grey eyes, quiet havens of sorrow, opened and asked where their owner was, and her breast like a billow in a place where two tides meet, that moment Octave laid her back against the rugged trunk, in the thick brown cloak which he had fetched when he went for the water, and wrapped it around her delicately, as if she were taking a nap there. O man of short pipes and hard bachelor fare, for this thou deservest as good a wife as ever basted a leg of mutton. At last the young lady looked up at him with a deep–drawn sigh, and said, "I am afraid I have been very silly." "No, indeed you have not. But I am very sorry for you, because I am dreadfully clumsy." She glanced at his snowy choker, which he never wore but on Sundays, and, being a very quick–witted young woman, she guessed at once who he was. "Oh, please to tell me. I hope the service is not over at Nowelhurst church." "The service has been over for a quarter of an hour, because there was no sermon." "Oh, what shall I do then? What can I do? I had better never go home again." This was said to herself in anguish, and Pell saw that he was not meant to hear it. "Can I go, please, to the rectory? Mr. Rosedew is from home, but I am sure they will give me shelter until I am sent for. I have lost my way in the wood here." This statement was none of the truest. "To be sure," said the hasty parson, forgetting about the Rushford bells, the rheumatic clerk, the quid–chewing pilots, let them turn their quids a bit longer. "To be sure, I will take you there at once. Allow me to introduce myself. How very stupid of me! Octavius Pell, Mr. Rosedew's curate at Rushford." Hereupon, Pello–Pepuli–Pulsum, as his friends loved to call him from his driving powers at cricket, and to show that they knew some Latin, executed a noble salaam, quite of the modern school, however, and without the old reduplication, like the load on the back of Christian, till the duckweed came out of his hat in a body, and fell into the flounce–tucket of the beautiful Pearl's white skirt. She never looked, though she knew it was there, that girl understood her business, but curtseyed to him prettily, having recovered strength by this time. And there was something in his dry manly tone, curt modesty, and breeding, without any flourish about it, which led the young maid to trust him, as if she had known him since tops and bottoms. "I am Pearl Garnet," said she, imitating his style unconsciously, "the daughter—I mean I live at Nowelhurstdale Cottage." Coræbus had cut off a stable long ago, with 3 long wheels from bamboo upon him, which he vowed he would show to Amy. "Please to take my arm, Miss Garnet. You are not very strong yet. I know your brother well. And a braver or more straightforward young gentleman never thought small things of himself after doing great ones." Pearl was delighted to hear Bob's praises, and Mr. Pell treated that subject so cleverly, from every possible point of view, that she was quite astonished when she saw the Rectory side–gate, and Octavius, in the most light–hearted manner, made a sudden and warm farewell, and darted away for Rushford. How good it is for a sad heavy heart to exchange with a gay and light one! "Hang it, after that let me have a burster," was his clerical ejaculation, "or else it is all up with me. I hope we haven't spilt the sermon, though, or got any duckweed down it. Duckweed, indeed! What a duck she is! And oh, what splendid eyes!" He ran all the way to Rushford, at a pace unknown to Coræbus, and his governor–coat flew away behind him, with the sermon banging about, and the text peeping out under the pocket–lap. "Swear not at all," were the words, I believe, and a rare good sermon it must have been, if it stuck to the text under the circumstances. The jolly old tars, after waiting an hour, orally refreshing their grandmothers' epitaphs, and close–hauling on many a tight yarn, were just setting up stun–sails to take grog on board the Lugger's Locker, hard by, as the banyan time was over. Let them ship their grog, and their old women might keep gravy hot, and be blessed to them. They had come there for sarvice, and shiver their timbers if they'd make sail till the chaplain came. Good faith, and they got their service at last, but an uncommonly short–winded one, a sermon moreover, which each man felt coming admirably home to his shipmate. Meanwhile, Mr. Pell had left behind no small excitement at Nowelhurst. For a rumour took wing after morning service, when the wings of fame are briskest in all country parishes, that Parson John was gone to London to complain to the Queen that Sir Cradock Nowell never came to church now, nor even sent his agent thither, to manage matters for him. For Mr. Garnet still retained his stewardship among them, though longing to be quit of it, and discharging his duties silently, and not with his old pronouncement, because his health was weaker. The vivid power of vital force seemed to be failing the man who had stamped his character upon all people around him, because he never said a thing which he did not think, and scarcely ever thought a thing with any fear of saying it. Hitherto we have had of Bull Garnet by far the worst side uppermost. I will offer no excuses now for his too ready indulgence of his far too savage temper. In sooth, we meet with scarce any case in which excuses are undiscoverable. God and the angels find them always. Our best earthly friends can see them, when properly pointed out; our enemies, when they want to make accusation of them. All I will say for Bull Garnet is, to invert the historian's sentence, "Haec tanta viri vitia ingentes virtutes exaequabant." These blemishes, however dark, had grand qualities to redress them. Strong affection, great scorn of falsehood, tenderness almost too womanly, liberality both of mind and heart, a real depth of sympathy, would all these coexist with, or be lost in, one great vice? It appears to me that we are so toothed in, spliced and morticed, dovetailed, double–budded, and inarched, both of good and evil, that the wrong, instead of poisoning the right, often serves as guano to it. Nevertheless, we had better be perfect, when we have found the way out. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Cradock Nowell, A Tale of the New Forest, Volume 2, by Richard Doddridge Blackmore. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Lynne Thompson. Chapter 17. It must not be forgotten that Rufus Hutton all this time was very hard at work, and so was Mrs. Corklemore. Between that lady and Eoa, pleasant little passes gave a zest to daily intercourse, George's boundless sympathies being circumscribed only by terror. Nevertheless, although Sir Cradock laughed when his spirits were good, and his mind was clear, at their fundamental difference, Georgie began to gain upon him, and Eoa to lose ground. How could it be otherwise, even if their skill had been equal, and Eoa not only had no skill, but scorned sweet Georgie for having any? How could Mrs. Corklemore fail of doing her blessed duty, when she was in the house all day, and Eoa out, jumping the river, or looking about for Bob Garnet? Whatever the weather was, out went Eoa, peering around for the tracks of Bob, which, like those of a mole, were self–evident, and then hiding behind a great tree when she found him, and hoping, with flutter of heart about it, that Bob had not happened to see her. Yet, if he happened not to see her, she would go up and be cross with him, and ask whether Amy Rosedew had turned to the right or left there, or had stopped in a hollow tree. And did Bob think that she looked well that morning? Then he had no right to think so. And perhaps her own new hat, with black ostrich, was a hideously ugly thing. Oh, she only wished there were tigers. Leave the little dear to do exactly as she liked, for nothing else she will do. And now, in looking through the forest, grey and white with winter, scorn we not the grand old trunk, in our gay love of the mistletoe? There is a very ancient tree, an oak well known and good of fame, even at the first perambulation of our legislator king. It stands upon the bend and brow under which two valleys meet, where a horseshoe of the wood has chanced, and water takes advantage. In the scoop below the tree, two covered brooks fetch round high places into one another, prattle satisfaction, and steal away for their honeymoon, without a breeze upon them. This Mark Oak, last of 7 stout brothers, dwells upon a surge of upland, and commands 3 valleys, 2 of which unite below it, and the other leads them off, welcoming their waters. The grand tree lifts its proven column, channelled, ramped, and crocketed, flaked with brown on lines of grey, and bulked with cloud–like ganglions. Then from the main–top, where is room for 50 archers to draw the bow, limbs of rugged might arise, spread flat, or straggle downwards. But the 2 great limbs of all, the power and main glory, the arms that reared their pride to heaven, are stricken, riven, and blasted. Gaping with great holes, and rotten, heavily twisted in and out, and ending in 4 long scraggy horns, ghastly white in the winter sun, where the squirrel durst not build, nor the honey–buzzard watch for prey, this shattered hope of a noble life records the wrath of heaven. The legend is, that a turf–cutter, having murdered a way–lost pedlar for the sake of his pack, buried the corpse in this hollow tree, and sat down on the grave to count his booty. Here, while he was bending over the gewgaws and the trinkets, which he had taken for gold upon the poor huckster's word, and which gleamed and flashed in the August twilight, the vengeance of God fell upon him. In bodily form, God's lightning crashed through the dome of oak above him, leaped on the murderer's head, and drove him through the cloven earth, breast to breast on his victim's corpse. You may be sure that the sons of XVII, a timid and superstitious race, find small attractions in that tree, when the shades of night are around it. John Rosedew did not return on the Monday, nor yet on the Tuesday, etc., not even until the last down–train roared through the forest on Saturday. Then, as it rushed through the dark night of winter, throwing its white breath, more strong than our own, and very little more fleeting, in bracelets on the brown–armed trees, and in chains on the shoulders of heather, the parson leaned back on the filthy panels of a second–class carriage, and thought of the scene he had left. He had written from London to Miss Rosedew, insisting, so far as he ever cared to insist on a little matter, that none at home should stay up for him, that no one should come to the station to meet him, and that Pell should be begged to hold himself ready for the Sunday's duty, because Mr. Rosedew would not go home, if any change should that day befall on lucky Cradock Nowell. Lucky Cradock, one ought to say, inasmuch as for a fortnight now he had lost all sense of trouble. Finding from Dr. Tink that no rapid change was impending, John Rosedew determined to see his home, and allay his child's anxiety. Moreover, he felt that his cure of souls must need their Sunday salting. Now, walking away from the wooded station that cloudy Christmas Eve—for Christmas that year fell on Sunday—how grand he found the difference from the dirty coop of London. The new moon was set, but the clouds began to lift above the tree–tops, and a faint aurora flushed and flickered in the far north–west. Then out came several stars, rejoicing, singing in twinkles their Maker's praise, and some of the sounds that breathe through a forest, even in the hush of a winter's night, began to whisper peace and death. John, who feared not his Master's works, and was happiest often in solitude, trudged along with the leathern valise, and 3 paper parcels strapped comfortably upon his ample back. Presently he began to think of home and his parish cares, and the breadth of God spread around him, and then from thinking rose unawares into higher communion, for surely it is a grander thing to feel than to think of greatness. And in this humour quietly he plodded his proper course for the first 4 miles or so, until he had passed the Dame's Slough, near the Blackwater stream, and was over against Vinney Ridge. But here he must needs try a short cut, through the Government woods, to Nowelhurst, though even in the broad daylight he could scarcely have found his way there. He thought that, in spite of his orders, Amy would be sure to stay up for him, and so he must hurry homeward. At a fine brisk pace, for a man of his years, he plunged into the deep wood, and in 5 minutes' time he had very little hope of getting out before daylight. Have you ever been lost in a great wood at night, alone, and laden, and weary, where the frithings had not been cut for 10 years, and there is no moon or wind to guide a man, and the stars glimpse so deceitfully? How the stubs, even if you are so quick–footed as not to be doubled back by them, or thrown down with nostrils patulous, how they catch you at the knee with 3 prongs apiece, and make you think of white swelling. Then the slip, where the wet has dribbled from some officious branch, or sow, or cow, summer pasturing, has kept her volutabre. Down you plump, and your heels alone have chance of going to heaven, because, unless you are a wonder, you employ such powerful language. Rising with some difficulty, after doubting if it be worth the while, and rubbing spitefully ever so long at the case of the part affected, you have nothing for it but to start again, and fall into worse disasters. Going very carefully then, you jump from the goading repulse of a holly into the hark of a hazel–bush, one which has numberless clefts and tongs, and is hospitable to a bramble. Tumbling out of it, full of thorns, recalling your Farnaby epigram, and wishing they had pelted the hazel harder, away you go, quite desperate now, knowing well that the wood is full of swamps, some of which will petrify you, under sundew and blue campanula, when the summer comes again. Through all these pleasing incidents and animating encounters, John Rosedew went ahead, and too often aheader, until he was desperately tired, and sat down to think about it. Then he heard 2 tawny owls hooting to one another, across at least a mile of trees, and every forest sound grew clearer in the stillness of the night. The sharp sad cry of the martin–cat, the bark of the fox so impatient, the rustle of the dry leaves as a weasel or rat skirred over them, the wing–flap of some sliding bird roused from his roost by danger, the scratching of claws upon trunks now and then, and the rubbing of horns against underwood. These and other stranger noises, stirring the down of darkness, moving the sense of lonesome mystery and of fear indefinite, were abroad on the air, in spite of Shakespeare, on that Christmas eve. John Rosedew laid his burden by, and began to think, or wonder, what was best to do. Long as he had lived amid the woods, he knew much more of classic sylvuli and poetical arundines than of the natural greenwood and the tasselling of morasses. Bob Garnet would have found his way there, or in any other English forest, with little hesitation. From his knowledge of all the epiphytes and their different aspects, the bent of the winter grasses, the sense which even a bramble has of sun and wind and rain, he would soon have established his compass, with allowance for slope and exposure. The parson sat upon an ant's nest, which had done its work, and feeling discharged, collapsed with him, a big nest of the largest British ant, which is mostly found near fir–trees. That nest alone would have told poor Bob something of his whereabouts, for there are not many firs in that part of the forest, and only one clump high up on a hill in the wood where John Rosedew had lost himself. But the man of great learning was none the wiser, only he felt that his small–clothes were done for, and Mr. Channing's fashionable cut gone almost as prematurely as the critic who had condemned it. "Now let me consider," said Mr. Rosedew to himself, for about the 50th time. "It strikes me at the first sight, though I declare I can't see anything, would that I could not feel. For I confess that these legs are grievous. But putting aside that view or purview of the question, it strikes me that, having no Antigone to lead me from this, which certainly is the grove of the Eumenides, there is another ant gone up my leg. Ingentes formica laboris. I wish he wouldn't work so hard, though, and I always have had the impression that they stayed indoors in the winter. Memorandum to consult Theophrastus, and compare him as usual with Pliny. Also look at the Geoponica, full of valuable hints. Why, there he is again, biting very hard, or stinging. What says Aristophanes about the music of the gnats? Indelicate, I fear, as he too often is. Nay, nay, good ant, if indeed thou art an ant. Why, what is that over yonder?" It was a dim light in the great hollow oak, the murderer's tree, as they called it, not 100 yards from John Rosedew. The parson approached it cautiously, for he knew that desperate men, and criminals under a ban, still harboured sometimes in the forest. As he drew nearer, the feeble light, glimmering through the entrance, showed him at once what tree it was, because the rays glanced through 2 dark holes under the bulging and beetling brow, which peasants call the eyes of God. John Rosedew was as brave a man as ever wept for another's grief, or with the word of God assuaged it. No man could have less superstition, unless, as some would have us believe, all religion is that. Upon this point we will not be persuaded, until we have seen them live the better, and die the more calmly for holding it. Yet John Rosedew, so firmly set, so full of faith in his Maker, so far above childish fears, which spring from the absence of our Father, he who, having injured none, had no dread of any, yet drew back and trembled greatly at the sight before him. A small reflector–lamp, with the wick overhung with fungus, stood upon a knotted niche in the hollow of the tree. By it, and with his face and eyes set towards the earth, a tall and powerful man, stripped to the waist, was leaning, with one great arm beneath his forehead, and bloody stripes across his back. The drooping of his figure, the woe in every vein of it, the deep and everlasting despair in every bone, It was an extremity of our human nature, which neither chisel nor pen may approach, nor even the mind of man conceive, until it has been through it. Presently the man appraised his massive head, and scorned himself for being so effeminate. He had nearly fainted with the pain. What right had he to feel it? Why should his paltry body quail at a flea–bite lash or so, when body and soul were damned for ever? But if his form had told of sorrow, great God, what did his face tell? He never sighed, nor groaned, nor moaned. His woe was beyond such trumpery. He simply took the heavy scourge from the murderer's grave, upon which it had dropped when the swoon came over him, and, standing well forth in the black hollow's centre, to gain full swing for his scorpion thongs, he lashed himself over back and round breast, with the utmost strength of his mighty arms, with every corded muscle leaping, but not a sign of pain on his face, nor a nerve of his body flinching. Then at last he fell away, and allowed himself to moan a little. John Rosedew would have leaped forward at once, in his horror at such self–cruelty, but that he saw who it was, and knew how his meddling would be taken. He knew that Bull Garnet's religious views were very strange and peculiar, and never must be meddled with, except at his own request, and at seasonable moments. Yet he had never dreamed that self–chastisement was part of them. "Garnet a wild flagellant!" said the parson to himself. "Well, I knew that he was an enthusiast, but never dreamed that he was a fanatic. And how shockingly hard he hits himself! Strong as Dr. Mastix at Sherborne, but the doctor took good care never to hit himself. Upon my word, I must run away. It is too sad to laugh at. What resolution that man must have! He scarcely feels the blows in the agony of his mind. I must reason with him about it, if ever I can find occasion. With such violation of his image, God cannot be well pleased." Meditating deeply upon this strange affair, the parson plodded homewards, for now he knew his way, with the Murderer's Oak for his landmark. At last he saw his quiet home, and gave a very gentle knock, because it was so late. The door was opened by Amy herself, pale, excited, and jumping. "Oh, Daddy, Daddy!" Chock, 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 such a lot of kisses, and both arms round his neck. "Corculum voluptas glycymelon anima mea." "Oh, papa, say Amy, dear, and then I shall know it is you." Then she laughed, and then she cried, and presently fell to at kissing again. I am afraid she proved herself a fool, but allowance must be made for her, because she had never learned before how to get on without her father. "Oh, you beautiful love of a daddy! I was quite sure you would come, you know, that you would not leave me any longer, so I would not listen to a single word any one of them said. And I kept the kitchen fire up, and a good fire in your pet room, dear. And I have got such a supper for you. Now, off with your coat in a minute, darling. Oh, how poorly you look, my own father! But we will soon put you to rights again. Aunt Doxy is gone to bed, hurrah! And so are Jemima and Jenny. And she won't have the impudence to come down, with all her hair in the jelly–bags. So I shall have you all to myself, dada. And if any one can deserve you, I do." "My own pet child, my warm–hearted dear," said John, with the tears in his eyes, "I had not the least idea that your mind was so ill–regulated. We must have a course of choriambics together, or the heavy trimacrine dimeter, as I have ventured to name it, about which not another short syllable till you have had a light trimackerel supper, and not a quasi–caesura left even." "Why, Amy, you are getting quite witty." And John, with one arm still in his overcoat, looked at her bright eyes wonderingly. "Of course I am, Dad, when you come home. My learning sparkles at sight of you. Come, quick now, for fear of my eating you before you begin your supper. You'll have it in the kitchen, you know, dear, because it will be so much nicer, and then a pipe by the book–room fire, and a chat with your good little daughter. "Oh, father, father, mind you never go away from me for such a long, long time again." John thought to himself that, ere many years, he must go away from his Amy for much more than a fortnight. But of course he would not damp her young joy with any such troubles now. "If you please, my meritorious father, you will come to the door and just smell them, and then you will have 5 minutes allowed you to put on your dear old dressing–gown, and the slippers worked by the Vestal Virgins. 5 minutes by the kitchen clock, and not a book to be touched, mind. Now, don't they smell lovely? I put them on when I knew your knock. The first mackerel of the season, only caught this afternoon. I sent word to Mr. Pell for them. He can do what he likes with the fishermen. And you know as well as I do, papa, you can never resist a mackerel." When John came down, half the table was covered with some of his favourite authors. Not that she meant to let him read, but only because he would miss his books a great deal more than the salt–cellar, and the other half she was bleaching, and smoothing, and stoking with a snowy cloth, soft and sleek as her own bare arms, setting all things in lovely order, and looking at her father every moment with the skirt of her frock pinned up, and her glossy hair dancing jigs on the velvet slope of her shoulders. And she made him hungrier every moment by savoury word and choice innuendo. "Worcester sauce, pa, darling, and a little of the very best butter, not mixed up with flour, you know, but melting on them, like their native element. Just see how they are browning, and not a bit of the skin come off. What is it about the rhombus, pa, and when I am to read Juvenal?" "Never, my child." "Very well, pa, dear, you know best, of course. But I thought it was very nice about weighing Hannibal in the Excerpta. Father, put that book down. I can't allow any reading. And after supper I shall expect you to spin me such a yarn, dear, to wind up the thread of your adventures." "Tollypefine," said John, calmly, although he was so hungry. The very word poor Cradock used in his rendering of that dirge. "Plod ou neca de consecutively ma ektollipisas oikaide salariferon inisas." "Oh, I forgot. Ah, yes, to be sure. A word, I mean, which expresses in a figurative and yet homely manner—" "Cradock, papa! Oh, father, have you been with him in London? Oh, how Aunt Doxy has cheated me! You know very well, my own father, that you cannot tell me a story. Did you go to London because poor Cradock was very, very ill?" "Yes," said her father. Those soft bright eyes beamed into his so appealingly. "My own child, your Cradock is very ill indeed." "Not dead, father? Oh, not dead?" "No, my child, nor in any great danger, I sincerely believe, just at present." "Then eat your supper, pa, while it is hot. I am so glad you have seen him. I am quite content with that." She believed, or she would not have said it. And yet how far from the truth it was. "You shall tell me all after supper, my father. Thank God for his mercies to me. I am never in a hurry, dear." Yet Amy, in dishing up the mackerel, had the greatest difficulty, for her breath came short, and her breast heaved fast, in holding back the tide of hysterics, which would have spoiled her father's supper. "My amulet, I cannot eat a morsel while I see your hand shake. Darling, I must tell you all. I cannot bear your anxiety." The second mackerel, a fish of no manners, instead of curling his tail at the frying, had glued it to the pan, until a tear of Amy's fried, and then he let go in a moment. John Rosedew caught his darling child, and drew her to his knees, with the frying–pan in her hand. And then he made her look at him, and she tried to have her eyes dry. Do what she might, she could not speak, only to let her neck rise, and her drooping eyelids tremble. "My own life's love, I have told you the worst. God is very good to us. Cradock has been at the point of death, but now he is better a little. Only his mind is in danger, and it must come home very slowly, if it comes at all. Now, darling, you know everything." She took his magnificent silvery head between her little white hands, and kissed him twice on either brow, but not a word she said. "My own sweet child," cried her father, slowly passing one arm around her, and swindling his heart of a smile. "I am apt to make the worst of things. Let us try to be braver, or at least to have more faith." She leaped up at that very last word, with the dawn of a glorious smile in her eyes, and she took the frying–pan once again, and eased out with a white–handled knife mackerel No. 3. But upon second thoughts she let him slide into the frizzle again, to keep him warm and comfortable. Her heart was down very deep just now, but for all that, her father must have and must enjoy his supper. "Father, I am all right now. Only eat your supper, dear. What a selfish thing I am!" "Have a bit, my darling heart." "Yes, I will have a bit of tail, pa, just to test my cookery. That's what I call frying. Look at the blue upon him, and the crisp brown shooting over it. Come, Daddy, no nonsense, if you please. I could have eaten all 3 of them, if I had only been out on the warren. And you to come starving from London. Now No. 3, papa, if you please." But she kept her face away from him, and bent her neck peculiarly. "How beautifully fresh this ale is! And the stuff they sell in London! I am almost inclined to consider the result of taking another half–glass." Her quick feet went pat on the cellar steps, while her father was yet perpending, and she came back, not a whit out of breath, but sweetly fresh and excited. "Such a race, pa, because I know of one family of cockroaches, and half suspect another. They are so very imprudent. Robert Garnet says that they stay at home, and keep their Christmas domestically, and I need not run for fear of them, at least till the end of April; and perhaps he is right, because he knows and studies everything nasty. Only I can't believe what he says about ants, because it contradicts Solomon, who was so very much older. Now, you paternal darling, let me froth it up for you." "Thank the Lord for as good a meal as ever one of his children was blessed with." The parson stood up as he said these words, and put his thick but not large hands together among the crumbs on the table–cloth. "Now, if you please, the leastest double superlative, pa, you know, like foremost, and something else. Oh, they will pluck me at Oxford. The very leastest little drop of the old French cognac we bought for parochial rheumatism, with 1 thin slice of lemon, an ablution of water, and half a knob of sugar." Before John could remonstrate, there it was, all winking at him, and begging to be sniffed before sipping. "My pet, you are so premature. How can I trust your future? You never give me time to consider a subject, even in the first of its bearings." "To be sure not, father. You know quite well you would take at least 8 different views of the matter, and multiply them into 8 others of people I never heard of. Now the pipe, dear. You shall have it here, because it is so much warmer. You know you can't fill it properly." So the parson, happy in having a child who could fill a pipe better than he could, leaned back in his favourite chair, which Amy had wheeled in for him, and held his long clay in his left hand, while his right played with her hair, as she sat at his feet and coaxed him. "Sermon all ready, dear? Well, you know best about that, Amy. I always trust you to arrange them." "Never fear, papa. Leave it to me. What would you do without me? I have put you out such a beauty, because it is Christmas Day, one that always makes me cry, because I have heard it so often. But you must have confidence in me." "Implicit confidence, my pet. Still, I like to run my eyes over them, for I cannot see as I did. My eyes are getting so old." "I'll kiss them till you can't see one bit, if you dare to say that again, papa. Old, indeed! They are better than mine, and I can see the pattern of a ladybird all across the room. There was a ladybird on the window to–day, at this time of year, only think! That was good luck, wasn't it? And a dear little robin flew in, and perched upon the hat–pegs, and then I knew that you must come home. Oh, you superstitious pet! I must reason with you to–morrow." CHAPTER XVIII. End of Cradock Nowell, A Tale of the New Forest, Volume 2, by Richard Doddridge Blackmore.